Thanks to all those brave enough to enter the Gaming Codex to show I try to explain to you all the various terms and words used within the video games industry. Today's word is one that causes much fear and anguish in the hearts of men. It is cinematic. Yes, that most dreaded word. And what is the meaning of this word, you may ask? Well, it is, according to the dictionary, relating to the cinema or having qualities characteristic to films. One of the oldest uses of this word is within the context of cinematic platformers. Those were a subgenre of platformers that sort of distinguished themselves from the norm, from your average Super Mario Brothers, by having a different kind of artistic sense to them. They tended to be a bit more grounded in reality, even though you are dealing with things that may have been supernatural, science fiction, or just fantastic in nature. And that realism was based entirely on the aesthetic. People looked like people, places looked like places, and the laws of physics would generally apply. But most importantly, the quality of the animations was more akin to something you would see in real life or in a movie, which is why games like Prince of Persia had rotoscoped animations that were taken frame by frame from actual people doing those actual movements in real life. And the reason they were called cinematic is that they took a lot of their cues from movies, from the way that the movies were shot, from certain angles, certain compositions of images, and from the fact that much like movies are visual mediums, so are these games. So yeah, all games are visual medium too. Even Super Mario Brothers, the story was conveyed through the action, you could say, but it wasn't as well displayed, I would say, as it is in Prince of Persia. And you could very well argue that most games made today are cinematic. I mean, just about every game that relies on having graphics that display the world, display the story, in more of a sense than just having a cardboard cutout sit around or a background with text on it, static images. It's about fluidity, it's about motion, it's about visual storytelling within the gameplay. Now, what is the popular definition of cinematic? Well, that would be that it looks nice and has cinematics, usually lots of cinematics. This definition is partially right on the money. Looking nice means that the graphics are striking, that the visual component stands out, that it has the ability to tell a story unto itself, to guide the player through the plot just visually, as long as, you know, it's done within the gameplay. But that's where the cinematics come in. The lots and lots of cinematics where you don't actually play a game anymore, you're looking at a movie. And that's no longer a cinematic experience, that's just cinema. You're not playing a game with superb graphics, grandiose decor, amazing animations, stunning visuals. You're looking at a cutscene. You can probably look at it on YouTube as well and you would get the exact same effect. No difference, no interaction, no game. And sometimes, and by that I mean quite often, the story that you're seeing in the cinematics is actually in contradiction to the story that you are seeing in the gameplay. You know, in the cinematic experience of the game and in the movie. For example, the Tomb Raider reboot from the last couple of years. In the cinematics, Lara Croft was traumatized and sad that she had to kill a deer, and about her current situation as being a castaway and most of her friends dying, probably, as far as she knew, while in the gameplay she would be murdering everyone constantly. Also, in other cinematics she would just be basically the T-1000, where she could drop down from high on places onto spikes, onto rocks, onto everything and not even get a bruise. What I'm getting at is that that game was a bit schizophrenic. We actually made a show about it a year ago in a different language. We maybe should redo it. Now, what is the marketing definition of cinematic? Well, that would be it runs at 30 frames a second at best and has shitty ass gameplay but lots of cinematics. And you kinda know where this comes from. The last couple of years, especially when the rise of the new console generation was afoot, you would see the word cinematic tossed around and well, especially people from marketing saying that 60 frames a second is actually bad. The human eye cannot see more than 30 frames a second or see for longer than 5 hours, so it's okay. The okay being that they made games that were running at 30 frames a second at best because they wanted to emulate a cinematic feel in the sense that it should have run at 24 frames a second, but it wouldn't have been playable properly at 24, but somehow it is at 30. There's a certain trend in marketing where they believe people to be dumb and not understand that a camera that captures film or a camera that captures digital recordings, a cinema camera, doesn't work in the same way as a game engine because those cameras also capture a blurring effect that is natural and happens between frames, whereas with games, for one, the motion blur looks like crap because it's applied as an after effect, not as something that is a consequence of the low frame rate, and also at a lower frame rate the controls are worse, objectively worse. And the shitty gameplay comes from the idea that, well, we're gonna have to make these games for people that go to Michael Bay movies and believe them to be the epitome of cinema, so quick-time events, hiding behind a wall, and sometimes shooting, calling the simplest form of flanking a tactical decision. Levels that are so linear you cannot get lost unless you're an absolute driveling moron, in which case we do have an arrow pointing you in the right direction, and also you can go back and get lost, and platforming in big quotation mark sections where you just play more quick-time events and that's it. And also lots and lots of cinematics that we basically blew our budget on by having named actors play some important or not important or forgettable, completely forgettable phoned-in parts, and having motion capture with everything. And it adds nothing to the story because we don't actually care what the story is, because if we did, we would have made a game that wasn't 5 hours, out of which 4 hours is hiding behind a wall and shooting at stuff and doing quick-time events. And yes, I am talking about the Order 1886. Well, that will be all for this edition of the Gaming Codex. Cheers to those who were brave enough to attend this session. I'll be back next time with a new word, a new term, and probably more swear words.